master inspection characteristics are the building blocks for quality planning. We will set up the different master inspection characteristics. They can be reusable, sometimes they can be very specific depending on the needs. And in this case, we will create one qualitative and quantitative characteristics as an example. Let's go to the video. Let's go to logistics, quality management, under quality planning, basic data. We will have inspection characteristics. These are the typical transactions, and we will use the QS21 to create. And basically we can have two types of master inspection characteristics. Basically it could be qualitative or quantitative. The qualitative is basically attributive. I mean, you have some attributes, and like colors, for example, or texture, or different, let's say, attributes. And on the other hand, the quantitative ones are measurements, are values, okay? So basically those are the main differences between the two. So let's start off creating, for example, one master inspection characteristic. Basically, for this plant, we can have the name here, could be some random name or whatever you want to call it, but basically we can also get the numeric assignment. Okay, so it will depend on the type of complexity, I would say, of your quality assurance system. You might need to assign numeric ones, because if you have multiple ones, it's much simpler to have numeric ones. Otherwise, you can just assign the name of it. For example, we can say color or color with you, right, depending on your preference. But basically, let's suppose we're creating color, or actually we can create color as well, right? This uppercase, for example. We can use template, and we can pick the information up from another one, or we can just create from scratch. Okay, so let's press enter. And basically, as I mentioned before, we can basically decide what kind of main attribute is. Basically can be quantitative or qualitative. Since this is color, it should be qualitative. Okay, so the first status is being created, and we need to decide what type of model we're going to use. For example, we can use the incomplete copy model. That means that we don't have to put all the information here, but we will need to complete it when we use it in an inspection plan, for example. Okay, or we can use a complete copy model, means that we have all the parameters needed, and we just can use it in the other inspection plan, for example, which is the second level of object that requires this inspection characteristic, if we want to use it, of course. It's not mandatory, but it's advisable to use, depending on the complexity. Again, it will depend on the complexity of the quality assurance system or for your business. And the third one, basically, it's a reference characteristic, means that all the changes has to be done at this level. And when you use this characteristic in multiple plans and you do a change in the regional characteristic or master inspection characteristic, it will be updated automatically in all the plans, because the plans are using a reference to this regional master inspection characteristic. Okay, so I hope you understand the differences, but basically, as I said, you can use the incomplete to continue completing the information. You can use the complete model just to use it, and then you can modify it, or you can use the reference, therefore you cannot modify it. Let's use the incomplete copy model. Short test. This would be color. The search would be color as well. And for this one in particular, we will have to assign a catalog, because when you have attributive characteristic, let's say, right, you need to have a very definite or specific values. Otherwise, you will never be able to match it, because you might put it in the wrong spelling, or you can use the wrong words for that. So to standardize, you need to use the catalogs where you can choose from a different options, okay? But the options are already defined, let's say. Okay, the next step is to go to control indicators. Basically, control indicators will have different parameters that we will define the behavior of this characteristic. So for example, this is one of the typical for the qualitative ones. We need to define characteristic attributive. We will assign as well for sample, we will assign the sampling procedure. So this means that we'll require the sample procedure. In the case of characteristics attributive, I forgot to mention that this will require the catalog of type 1 to be assigned. Means that we will select from a selected set of different, let's say, codes, okay, with their own description for this characteristic. Basically, we will say different colors, for example, right? So we will just need to choose from this catalog the different colors that this sample might have. There are other characteristics here, or attributes, I'm sorry, practically there are attributes here. We will select them later in different videos regarding more complex, let's say, functionalities. Okay, but in this case, like for example, SPC, if we want to use SPC, it's not valid in this case because it's not quantitative, but we will use it when we talk about statistical process control, for example, or the same for recording the numbers of defects and so on. From the results confirmation, we will keep the summary recording, but this will mean basically if we need to use or want to give single results, or we want to give just summary. In the attributives, typically we use a summary, or when you have 2 or 3 samples, you want to just put the summary of them. Or in some cases, if you have more samples and they are quantitative, you might need to record the single results, let's say. But in this case, we will keep this summary recording, and we will talk about these other attributes later in the series. So the other point important here is that required characteristic, right? So it means that we need to put some values there. So we cannot just skip it, okay? And the other one will be optional. Okay. Then we have others like after acceptance or after rejection. Means that we want to inspect this characteristic only after acceptance or another one, or rejection of another one, and so on. So we will see those more complex cases later in the training, but not this time. The same for defects recording. When we want to use defects, we will check this defects recording checkbox here. Okay, so basically with this will be enough for our initial creation of this characteristic. So when we click on that, the system is showing us the second screen. Okay, so remember that we have only 2 screens, I would say, for the control indicators, okay, for every characteristic. So basically the scope means how many samples are you gonna inspect. Typically we will use the fixed scope, means that we want to put for example, if the samples numbers are just 1 sample or 2 or 3, we will inspect that 1, 2 or 3. Okay, so it means that the fixed scope It's not smaller, it's not larger, or it's not fixed. For example, if it's not fixed, means that you can type in many results if you want. Documentation confirmation, typically we will just keep this time no documentation, but it's very typical to use if rejected. So it means that you can type in a little more information when it's rejected, for example. This is a kind of replacement for the defect recording, okay? But if you use defect recording, probably you don't need to use this one as well, neither, okay? But basically we will keep the no documentation this time. Then we have other miscellaneous attributes that will work in other functionalities, like the long-term inspection. We will have a specific probably video of that, scrap share, quality score, these results recording change document, and the test equipment assignment. We will see this on the test equipment video. And print basically means that this would be printed in the paperwork in case we want to print that. That's it. So we covered the main control indicators, at least for this initial stage of complexity, let's say. And then when we have a specific functionalities or business cases or scenarios, we will need other parameters than the control indicators. So as I mentioned, since we define attributive characteristic here, the system will require the catalog to be assigned, okay? So this catalog type is one attribute, okay? The category type is attributive, it's one. And we need to choose here the catalog, in this case, or selected set. In this case, we will use the, I believe it's color. It's already created, so I don't have to create it again. So yeah, this one. Let's choose the color, okay? So this is specific for this plant because it's as I mentioned, it's a selected set. We will discuss this in details in another video probably, but basically the catalogs can be have a sub-catalog which is called selected set, which is just a group of codes within the main catalog, let's say, okay? So in this case means that for this plant they will use specific codes, okay, for attributives. Or attributes in this case, I would say. So basically we already assigned this catalog and that's it. This is the main task we have for this master inspection characteristic creation, okay? So let's summarize what we did. Basically we assigned as an incomplete copy model, so it means that we didn't have to put all the information. So this time, actually I can change this to complete copy model because we ended up putting all the parameters, okay? So since it's all the parameters are set, we can consider the complete copy model here. And of course, we can say released. Okay, now we are in QS24. Just to display master inspection characteristic. So we put the plant in C710. Then the characteristic was color. Then we press enter. So we can see now the it has been released. It's a complete copy model. The search field here, the short text, the catalog has been assigned. And we can see the control indicators. It's attributive, simple procedure, summary recording, required characteristics, and then we will see the second fixed scope, no documentation, and it's printed. That's it. So this is our first characteristic, or master inspection characteristic has been created. So let's go to a second section. Okay, this time we're going to create again QS2021. It's at C710 plant. This time we will create a new master inspection characteristic. Will be quantitative. It's gonna be, for example, diameter. Okay, so we'll press enter. Let's call it complete copy model because we're planning to put everything there. As you can see, this is not the right way, probably, because you might have different diameters for different raw materials and that kind of stuff. So that's why I was suggesting just to keep the number of sequential number, right, instead of a name. Okay, but just for the purpose of the sake of understanding here, much easier to understand if we actually see the name of the master inspection characteristic. Okay, so the search field is going to be the same in this case, but important thing here is that this time is quantitative. Okay, so pressing quantitative, and let's go to the contour indicators. Okay, this time we have two options. Basically, we can say check the target value, or basically we can use the typical thing, which is the lower and upper specification limit. Of course, this will be depending on your own characteristic, right? For example, for chemicals, if you're trying to measure some impurity, for example, you might have only the upper specification limit because it will be just 1%, for example, or 0.5%. Or on the other hand, if it's the concentration, basically you will say not lower than 90%, 95%, 98%, depending on the product or the raw material actually. So let's keep it this way. In this case, we're talking about diameter. So let's keep both limits. It's going to be summary recording. It will be a required characteristic, and we will ask for the sampling procedure assignment. We will discuss the sampling procedure later on a different video, okay? But basically this will mean that it's required when you're using this characteristic or within an inspection plan, okay? This time we might also select the SPC, but we will do that in a different video, as I mentioned, in a different, more complex business cases or business scenarios. Okay, so let's close this, let's close this window, and let's keep the fixed scope, no documentation this time. And record measure values means that we want to keep the values visible, right, in the database, so we can consult or we can check what the values were. Print, of course, in no formula this time. Okay, what is different here is that we can use formulas for quantitative characteristics. Basically, we can say, typically we'll say no formula, means that you will have to type in the value. But you can also have calculated characteristics. For example, let's say you want to add up two values, okay, as a total impurity, or for example, right? So you have impurity 1 and impurity 2, you put both values in, and then a third characteristic would be total impurity, okay? So they will add up those two values into one automatically, so you don't have to type in or calculate the value for yourself, okay? So basically that is the typical use of that. Okay, let's select this one, and we will discuss and check some cases in different videos along this training. So we might use tolerance and key, or we might use target value as well. Okay, so we might have a target value, then we can have some reports depending on what the target value is. But we don't need to put anything here if we don't need to. For this case, we will just keep the simple way. So how many decimal places we want to use? Let's say we want 1. for example. Okay, so it's 1 decimal place. Oop. Sorry, 1. Oop. Yeah, fine. Measurement unit, I believe we can use centimeters if we use, or we can use 0 and we can put everything in millimeters, for example. Okay, so what the lowest limit will be, let's suppose this is a diameter for a bottle, for example. Let's say the lower would be maybe we can use centimeters, and we can use 1 decimal. Okay, so let's keep it in 10, and the upper limit can be 20.6, for example. Okay, so yeah, so let's save it. We can see it again here. Okay, the system assigned a 0 here because we said we want 1 decimal place. And that's it. So we have our first quantitative characteristic, or master inspection characteristic. If you remember, for the other one we used a catalog because it was attributive, it was qualitative, right? So we had to choose from different let's say values or possible values, but in this case it's just numbers. Okay, let's save it, and that's it. This video is over, but don't you worry, there are more videos to come. Do you want to become an SAP S/4HANA QM consultant? If so, you can purchase the entire full series of videos, or you can purchase one-to-one coaching sessions with me. Thanks.